So, welcome back to our last session of the 9th Annual Socialist Action International Conference. And this morning the topic is Aboriginal and Quebecois Aspirations, National Liberations in the Canadian State. And our speakers today, and they will go as I name them now. The first one is Brother Roger Obonsawin, and he is the President of the Aboriginal People's Council of Toronto, the past President of the National Association of Friendship Centres, and SDOI Group of Companies. Roger is a veteran campaigner for Aboriginal and treaty rights, both for status Indians and Métis people. Second speaker will be Dr. Robbie Mahood, practices medicine in Montreal and is a leading member of SA, League for Action Socialist, and is active in the leftist party Quebec Solidaire. He was a QS candidate for the Quebec National Assembly in 2009 and ran for the PDS party for Socialist Democracy Montreal in '98. Originally from Saskatchewan, Robbie is a pro-choice physician who helped to establish the Morgenthaler Clinic in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And our third speaker this morning is Brother Marc Bonhomme. He's a writer, a political activist, and a member of the Quebec Solidaire Executive in his Montreal constituency. So without further ado, I will call on Brother Roger.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
And I want to thank the organizers for your interest and yourselves for your interest in coming to this session. As was mentioned, my name is Roger Obonsawin. Obonsawin means pathfinder. And in giving you a name, you have a task. The other one I was given was the Eagle by my friend who's passed away now, Joe Sylvester, who brought a lot of the customs that were lost back to Toronto. A lot of people, he had to go out west to talk to some of the elders there about the ways of Native people, and brought those back to Toronto, and we saw a resurgence in people coming to us at the Native Canadian Centre of Toronto to find out who they were, really, because they were adopted or they were lost in those awful years. So it's on their behalf that I'm continuing the battle. When Joe gave me my name, it was the Eagle, but my task was to fly high above and to watch where government was going and to come back and report back to the community so that we can strategize on how we can really break out of really it's still a Holocaust that I see against Native people. I am a member of the Quebecois Confederacy, which owns part of Quebec, Maine, and the Maritimes. My reserve is Odanak. It's about halfway between Montreal and Ottawa. I was born and raised in Sudbury, Ontario, since my grandfather and his brother moved into the Sudbury district by working on helping to lay down the CN rail line to a community close to that city when the Trans-Canada line was being installed. I would be remiss if I did not mention that my mother, who is of French descent, would tell us to always be proud of who I am. And I could not understand why my father tried to discourage her and myself of doing so at that time. At first, I thought he was ashamed of his birthright, but I eventually discovered that this was not the case. At that time, he was working at the Fruit Mine in Sudbury. He would get up at 6 in the morning to go to work and would come back at 5 p.m. He would eat, shower, and shave, and then go to work at the local pub, the Park Hotel, and serve beer until closing time at 12 p.m. This was his working day. But he still had time to teach us values as citizens of Canada. These included respect for your elders your spouse, your teachers, and your fellow citizens. And most of all, respect for yourself as being honest, trustworthy, and self-sufficient. It is my hope that he is watching over me today and that he is pleased with what he sees. If not, I will hear about it when I join him. I hope I end up in the same place. However, I'm not here to talk about myself, but I thank you for indulging with me as I walk down memory lane. Many Canadians, too many, have a lot of misconceptions about Native peoples in Canada. They believe that there are two founding nations, the French and the English. They totally disregard the fact that there are more than 56 Indigenous nations occupying lands across what is now known as Canada, or Canada, when European contact first occurred. They dismissed us in the past and continue to dismiss us now, in spite of all the apologies. Every new prime minister comes in, apologizes to Native people for the wrongs that were done with the residential schools, and I, for one, cannot accept that apology, because their policies are the same as they were then, and until they change those policies, I will not accept an apology. And I want Harper in this room. And I challenge Harper to come in this room and apologize to Indian people in the way that says your rights are recognized, because they still punish Indians for practicing their rights, which I will talk about later. So there's a lot of misconceptions about Native peoples in Canada. They believe that there are two founding nations, the French and the English, and they totally disregard the fact that more than 56 Indigenous nations occupying lands across what is known Canada. They treated us as uncivilized and without the ability to look after our lands, in spite of the fact that we helped the first settlers to survive the first harsh winters and fought with them to maintain Canada's sovereignty in those days. The first treaties, therefore, were partnership agreements, which defined how we could coexist as independent nations within Canada. In spite of these treaties, subsequent Canadian governments continue to claim that they are the owners and stewards of this, our lands known as Canada. And as we speak, there are still lands that the government is taking over and have starved the people from those lands to the point where they've given in, and then they lose that land as well. It's happening to this day, and it will continue to happen until we put a stop to it. They claim to have dominion over us with the power and authority to control in all aspects of our lives through such legislation as the Indian Act and others. They continue to mislead the public, mainly by keeping the truth from them. Now, even the Canadian courts believe and sanction these misconceptions. This was especially true in the Benoit Treaty 8 case. The truth is that we have never given up our sovereignty. As independent nations, our sovereignty over our lands and resources, especially the resources, the dwindling resources, that they're prepared to give it back to us when they've polluted it all. But we respect that land. We have not given up those large tracts of land, for the most part, of our lands. We have not given up the large tracts of lands known as our respective Indigenous territories. Whether it is the Benoit, the Shilling, the Monias, or the multitude of other court cases, we have never given up our Aboriginal treaty rights to tax immunity. Canada and its provinces have no legitimacy to tax citizens of our nations. Canada is desperately attempting to extinguish all our rights by trying to negotiate what they call modern-day treaties. These are extinguishment treaties. They follow the path of assimilation as outlined in a '69 white paper of then Indian Affairs Minister Jean Chrétien, and later the Nielsen report accepted by the Mulroney cabinet. The latest attempts to distort history and impose federal jurisdiction over us are called the First Nations Goods and Services Tax Act and the Goods and Services Tax. Fortunately, some of our leaders successfully fought against those and partially won. The first one was done quietly, passed, while many of our people across Canada fought against a suite of legislation advanced by then Minister Null. It is understandable when the general population of Canada does not know their own history in relation to Native peoples. What is not excusable, however, are the efforts of some of our so-called leaders who are pushing for legislation that goes against what our ancestors fought so valiantly for. And some of them have earned the right to be on the Senate of Canada as a result of their sellouts. I won't get into any personal explanation of that. Whether it's the imposition of the Indian Act, which resulted in broken families through force leading to genocide and displacement, the 1969 White Paper of Jean Chrétien, the First Nations Governance Act, or the Fiscal Institution Act of subsequent minister, we must continue to oppose the so-called Government of Canada, denial of our Aboriginal treaty rights. If we believe that we are truly sovereign Indigenous nations, as our elders have taught us, we have to begin to act like nations and not like the puppets of Ottawa. I, Roger O'Bonswin, am prepared to continue to fight for our rights, even if it results in a jail term, which I very briefly had, or face the guns of the opposition. It was interesting when we, as an aside, we had an occupation on Parliament Hill, and we had put up the teepees, and we were there for about 3 nights, and then the RCMP came in and to remove us, and the Parliament buildings, by the way, are on native land, they had so we were all sitting in a tent there, and they came barging in with their big trailers they were going to put us all in. We weren't that many, and they took us out of the teepees and they handcuffed us, and they started arguing with the. He was trying to handcuff me, but I was yelling at him. So why are you bothering me? I said, well, he says, I'm a native. He said, I'm native. I said, well, you take off that badge, and then I'll deal with you as a native. But until you take off that badge, you're on their side. And they put us in the paddy wagon, and then they got into their own fight. And then they let us off, and they said, well, you didn't do anything wrong, you can go. And then I got really mad. So I have faced those guns, and I've always said to people that come with us, you know, you have to be prepared to face those guns, and if it happens, it happens. Otherwise, don't bother, because they don't take you seriously anyways. And it's unfortunate, very unfortunate situation. Canada has been masters on the international world about saying it's so good to get to Native people, but the opposite is true. So I owe this to my clients, my friends who have supported me through difficult times, my Native families, and all my relations. And I dedicated that to Joe Sylvester, who brought the traditional beliefs and ways back to us in subsequent generations. Walter Rudnicki, who has passed away, who in spite of being wrongfully fired by the Government of Canada, exposed the corruption and hate expressed by his colleagues and so-called leaders when he was a government employee, and all of you who have valiantly fought with me to protect our rightful place in Canada without prejudice and mistreatment. I must admit that I, for one, cannot accept the apology of Stephen Harper for the history of residential schools and alienation from parents and friends when even our token rights are not respected. It's fine to talk about all of these things, but what do? Well, unfortunately, a lot of Native people don't understand policy, and and sometimes it's kept from them.